Hi, loves. I had this memory pop into my head the last couple days, and I felt compelled to share this story around our choices when it comes to fear. So, when I was pregnant, and I'm going to say this was around 20 weeks, I had some genetic testing done. And this was 5 or more years ago. I had some genetic testing done, and markers came back that I was a carrier for some genes for cystic fibrosis. And if you're not familiar with cystic fibrosis, it's a condition that primarily affects the lungs. It also affects the pancreas, but children with cystic fibrosis have respiratory troubles, and there's varying degrees of severity of the disease. In its most severe form, kids end up needing lung transplants to survive, and most children with cystic fibrosis don't live past their 20s. So it's a pretty serious diagnosis. I worked in a pediatric ICU for several years. I've seen many of these kids. I know I have a glimpse at what their life is like in the worst times of it, right? When they require hospitalization or ventilation. And so you can imagine that when you get news like this while you're pregnant, it could be very scary. So I was in this pregnancy group, and I went to the group, and we all shared our updates with what was going on, and I shared mine. And the girls in the group were like absolutely flabbergasted that I wasn't freaking out, terrified, crying. And, my answer was, well, first of all, the odds are low that this child will be born with cystic fibrosis. And I just made a choice when I got that news, and I just surrendered. I literally remember saying to myself, if my path is to be the mother of a sick child and to do the hospital stays with them and to be their major caretaker nurse, I accept that path. It's not the path I want. It's not what I would choose. But there's inherent value in the things we receive that we did not choose, because sometimes what we need is not what we want, and what we want is not what we need. We always get what we need. We don't always get what we want. And so I just quickly came to this place of trust and surrender. And I just said, I surrender to whatever is for my highest good here, whatever is for the highest good of this child. And so we wound up, my husband at the time got his genetic testing done, and he was not a carrier for any of those cystic fibrosis traits. So there was essentially zero chance that my daughter would be born with cystic fibrosis. So that also leads you into the next point of the story, which is during that few weeks where I didn't know if he was a carrier, I could have gone down that fear path. I could have gone down crying, exhaustion, adrenaline pumping through me all day, which feeds right into the baby. I could have gone down the rabbit hole with this, right? I could have done all this research and looked at all these things, but I just made a choice to surrender. I made a choice that if this is my path, I accept it. If this is my child's path and this is what they came here to experience on planet Earth, I trust that it is my job to support them, and this is what I signed up for before I came here. I just don't remember. And so in the long run, right, my daughter was born very healthy and there was nothing wrong. And but I consciously made a choice to surrender at that point in time. And I think this also speaks to our programming that there is one path to happiness. And sort of the modern white American path to happiness is you go to school, you go to college and get a degree, you get a regular 9-to-5 job, you get married, you have 2 children, you buy a house, you save your money in your retirement funds, you retire at 65, and that's the path to happiness. And I have to tell you that may be the path to happiness for some people, but that's not the path to happiness for a lot of people, right? This white, cis, narrow, intellectual system is not the path to happiness for most people. And I'll share a story about a family member who had very severe cerebral palsy. And he was my brother-in-law. He passed away a few years ago. But he had very severe cerebral palsy. So he was wheelchair bound. He could only drink like milkshakes, essentially, was his primary form of nutrition, because he couldn't chew or swallow anything solid. And so in this narrow path of happiness, he had a sad life. But when I met him and spent time with him, he was a powerful, powerful soul. And so his challenges in life were different than our standard challenges, right? His challenges were around immobility and inability to make his own decisions about what's going to happen to him in the day. His challenges were around inability, a different way of communicating, because although he couldn't speak, he was very, very highly communicative. So, when I met him, I was like, this man is a very highly evolved soul. And so not everyone would get that impression. And this was many, many years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, before I really tapped into my intuitive gifts and all these things. So even back then, I felt through my empathy who he was. And so he didn't have to worry about money and bills. He didn't have to worry about trying to find a partner in life. He didn't have to worry about, appearances and social constructs, right? So his challenges were different. Does that mean he did not lead a beautiful, incredible, miraculous life that expanded his consciousness? No, because he definitely did lead that life that powerfully expanded his consciousness. And so I think when these points in life come up where there's this big disruption that says, okay, you may or may not be deviating from the normal path of happiness, you have to ask yourself, well, is that really a bad thing? Can I still live a joyful, powerful, happy life by giving up this standard path to happiness? And so this comes back to the concept of non-duality or non-polarity, where we take each circumstance, each situation, each moment, each experience that comes into our life, and we don't automatically say, is this good? Is this on the standard path to happiness? If it's not, it's bad, right? So we have to come to this space where we accept that experiences are not good or bad. They are just experiences. And when we can learn to embrace those experiences and surrender to them and trust that these experiences are leading us on a path to more joy, on a path to more higher levels of consciousness, on a path to more learning, to more soul expansion, then it takes all that fear out. It takes all that anxiety. It takes away all that need to try and control and figure out and manipulate our situation around us. So when we can come back to that principle of trust and faith, it's so freeing, and it's so grounding, it's so calming, and it's so peaceful. And oftentimes the thing we are most afraid of is not coming anyway. The things we get so scared of, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if this? What if that? 99.9% of the time they don't happen. And so we've wasted a ton of energy. We have leaked a tremendous amount of energy into these circumstances that aren't real. And so when you can come back to choosing trust, faith, and surrender into what is coming down your path, this is how you come to a space of enlightenment. This is how you achieve emotional freedom and energetic sovereignty. All right, love you guys.